May I ask Nico must share the presentation? Or should I share the presentation? Okay, so for tonight's talk, I'll be talking about how the idea of Pasig River as part of the urban landscape shapes the idea of what a Filipino is and how we are as a people. However, I have this reservation about the format of this presentation because I feel that we'll just be discussing in an echo chamber where we will not be able to, really reach people for those who would be understanding the issue. I mean, the language itself. But anyway, pardon for this presentation. I think to be very academic. So I titled it. I retitled it again with this one, with the landscape and aesthetics. Although we might think that aesthetics is quite superficial in a sense, but I feel that there's a need for us to articulate the cultural values of a neglected river, such as this. Next. I'd like to show you the Pasig River as it is now. So Taj showed a Pasig River in its history as its value as of treasure trove for different archaeological finds. However, I would like to highlight here how Pasig River looks like, and I don't think it's something that we should be ashamed of. And covering this with PAREX would totally mar this marvelous view. Next. I would want to pose this question. In a highly competitive market economy under the conditions of globalization, the question is there any space for alternative visions and valuations of landscapes besides and beyond the economic bottom line? I think it's what the issue right now. If found to be lacking, can that space be created? So I just want to leave this question on your mind. Next. So with all the things that are happening now, or whatever development that we are proposing with or in relation to Pasig River, why are we neglecting Pasig River as an important cultural landscape? So I would like to look into the possible reasons why we have little regard as to Pasig River as an important cultural landscape. Next. Next slide. Okay, so regarding aesthetics, okay, in Edmund Burke, a philosopher, published a treatise on landscape aesthetics, which argued that landscape evokes strong feelings in people, both awesome and pleasurable. However, if these are not evoked anymore, what is there still a landscape aesthetics attached to Pasig River? In his philosophical inquiry, he avoided references to Christian theology, a secular language to explain profound human experiences. His interest was to better understand how our minds respond to landscape experiences in order that these could help establish standard of taste and find laws for passions. The concept of the sublime and beautiful were, in Burke's view, frequently compounded and indiscriminately applied. Next. So many of the questions on why or how we are developing this could be linked into our concept of beauty. Most of the political and policy thinking about landscape since the 19th century has focused on conserving what is referred to as natural beauty in landscape. So this arose from concerns about the loss of countryside, industrialization, and expansion of cities. And if you remember your history, this is the Romantic period. So debates about natural beauty and aesthetic qualities in landscape are often hotly contested. The consequence is that the concept of beauty in landscape is as open to misinterpretation and abuse today as it ever was. So the question now is, do we appreciate the beauty of Pasig River? And if not, what are we doing with it? Okay, next. Slide. Next slide, please. The landscapes that we have now are being transformed, reflecting the long history of struggle for the landscapes between interests of capitalism and conservation. There is a there is a sharp distinction between nature and society and or culture that has been one of the central planks or tenets of scientific endeavor for centuries, which is not surprising given the self-evident status this distinction has occupied during the Western cultural history, especially since the time of Descartes and Bacon. Sorry, I'm dropping these names of philosopher, but I think these are really essential when we are discussing about aesthetics. Next slide. The production of nature, as written by Smith, is evident in the valuations placed on nature's material manifestations as resources and as raw material, as well as space for locating various productive activities. So what I'm hinting here is that we are looking at Pasig River as a productive space, which is not suitable anymore in a globalized economy. So we have been trying to make it more productive by having these different constructions or proposed developments. Next. So the social and cultural constructs on the meaning of nature is it has questioned the reality of nature, highlighting instead the diversity of meanings and symbols associated with and afforded by nature, that nature is only made knowable through the use of culturally coded concepts. Much of the academic attention has accordingly been directed towards analyzing the historical evolution of various cultural conceptualizations of nature, and we are neglecting how the present or what a culture that is being incubated now in the landscape is present there. So what we are missing here is that we might be always looking for something that is archaic, that is old, and we are neglecting the cultural landscape that is present existing in Pasig River. Next. So the term landscape has itself been accused of serving as merely a visual mask, diverting attention from much more substantive issues. So the inherent duplicity of landscapes endows the concept with the capacity to veil historically specific social relations and the often aesthetic appearance of what is considered nature. So the original meaning of landschaft, or that's the original landscape, was that of territorial polity, which entailed certain rights and duties for those living within its bounds, meaning substantive as opposed to scenic, okay, meaning which later took hold, especially in England, of a visual representation of a particular kind or a way of seeing. When we talk about the difference between substantive and scenic, usually it really is dependent on who is taking that perspective. Substantive would be for those who are in that landscape, while scenic would be for those who are tourists, who are not endemic in that landscape. So there is an implication there that when we are looking for something scenic, we are looking for something that is exciting, something that is beyond our usual experience, while substantive would be for people who are in that landscape, benefiting from that landscape. Slide. Okay, so this just shows a print of Pasig River in the 19th century. Next. And this is how Pasig River looks like right now. We might see a spaghetti electrical lines. We have industrial factories and embankments along its bank. Next. But in the Burnham Plan, Pasig River is envisioned to be a conduit to refresh the city So although our discussions about culture, this would have impact on the urban heat island effect. If we're going to block this area, block this space covered by Pasig River. Next. And in one of my studies here, I highlighted the different historical places with this heat map, wherein I tried to locate all the different sites that have been marked by the NHCP for cultural significant sites. And as you can see, many of these are concentrated along Pasig. Next. And further, if we're going to look at, next slide, please. And if you're going to look at the different specific points of these different sites with historical markers, you will see that they are mostly concentrated along Pasig River. This is mainly because, as explained by Taj, that many of the trades, of the earlier trades or even pre-colonial trades, are found along the banks of Pasig River as a means of transporting the goods and services, and for trade. Thus, the many of the architectural heritage sites are found also along Pasig River. Next. And some of these are still here with us. Even though we might look at it and might see it as dilapidated, this marks some of the areas with heritage value that plays an important role in our identity as Filipinos. Next. And this is the Pasig River that is being developed with different contemporary structures that are being built to take advantage of the views, the breeze, and also the environmental value that is afforded by Pasig River. Next. So what we need is to review what is nature. So another set of criticisms of the visual understanding of landscape relates to the pretensions involved in attempting to achieve a detached assessment of landscapes by analyzing its scenic characteristics. This is usually by those that are not living in this landscape. So presumptions about detachment and objectivity have been accused of erasing the history, which is always part and parcel of the landscape. Past power struggles and ideological meanings associated with the landscapes are often overlooked. Such an approach, therefore, as it is argued, has a disempowering effect on local inhabitants, those who are living along the banks of Pasig River, and at worst, obliterating them from the history of the landscapes in which they live and from which they make their living. Next. So what is needed is a reformed aesthetic of the unspectacular. A great deal of cultural engineering could probably be required to achieve such a goal. And the natural environmental model of aesthetics advanced by Carlson, who assigns a central role to natural scientists in matters of aesthetic judgment about nature, is to how we can properly appreciate a landscape's visual appearance, and we have to know the formative processes which brought it into being. So it's not just someone is going to build over it just because it doesn't serve his or her economic purpose, because they are not part on how that landscape evolved over time. Next. And this is part of the Pasig River with the National Post Office. And how can we retell the story? So the visual resource management methods involves the delineation and mapping of geographical units that are rated and ranked according to various criteria pertaining to scenic quality, sensitivity to change, viewing distance, and so on, and analyzed through overlay techniques. So the aesthetic sense cannot be divorced from everyday life and practice. Also, there is a need to stress the capacity of nature to provide moving emotional experiences of considerable richness, where our cognition do not mobilize the far more formal and recondite system of knowledge found in natural history and science. Next. And the world needs more stories of nature and landscapes, stories which could and should have political significance by virtue of their very existence. Stories that have their roots in a diversity of sensual experiences in nature. It may be visual, oral, olfactory, and even somatic. So geography as a location of the river is itself a riotous discipline of many and diverse narrative traditions. So we could aid people who are knowledgeable in geography to tell stories about the beauty of landscape, and just as importantly, to argue for their being respected in the halls of political and economic power. Okay, for my references, thank you very much.